So we are in the chapter called Geopolitical Mass Child Stealing, and she starts off with a quote from herself actually. True orphans are those whose parents have died and no one claims them. But labeling a child an economic orphan provides him with a one-way ticket to the world marketplace. So we're going to be talking about a matter of supply and demand. I am just going to begin by saying that a lot of this chapter I will not be reading only because it is a very long chronological order. Um, and if you are interested in that, please go check out the book. I did find my copy in the library, so you can get a copy. It's also very inexpensive on Amazon. And we do want to support the authors here, so go ahead and do that. But I will be giving you the rest of the chapter, which is really informative and needed. Okay, continuing on. Because in the U.S., the states are financially rewarded for increasing adoptions. The supply of babies and children for sale must keep up with the demand. Thus, policing, Child Protective Services, aka CPS, arm of public social services, as well as independent adoption agencies, do not have to respond to Freedom of Information Act requests intended to check up on government finds creative ways to acquire babies and children. It's a pity that individuals within the U.S. social service agencies and legislators don't form a coalition with a website to oppose forced adoptions. As in the UK, Britain is catching up with the country that the United Nations called the largest market for stolen children in the world, aka the United States. Now, sorry, pausing here, the UK does have its set of problems within the adoption and foster care realm. They don't have privatized adoptions, but they definitely are pushing the adoptions from the foster care, what they are considered foster care, and they're pretty closed. It is a problem, and there are plenty of TikTokers, UK TikTokers, who are talking about it, both from the adoptee slash foster care youth, and as well as the birth parent point of view. So please bear that in mind. It's slightly better in the sense that there's no privatized, but they have a huge problem as well. Anyway, continuing on. John Hemming, Member of Parliament in the United Kingdom, cloned a page from AM4's website to support of his campaign to end forced adoptions in the UK. The webpage he used incorporates both an article by Christopher Broker, which is called "The Real Scandal Hidden by Gags is What Goes On in Family Courts," and AM4's Adopted Child Syndrome, Its History and Relevance Today. Booker's article states that the walls of secrecy surrounding snatched children are creating a one-sided justice system. Mr. Hemming's concern stems from his long-standing campaign to expose the secrecy surrounding the family courts, where one of the most shocking scandals in Britain today is flourishing out of public view. This is the increasing number of children who are seized by social services from loving, responsible parents, thanks to a system which often defies basic principles of justice, humanity, and common sense, very much like the foster care and adoption industries in the United States. Hemming bravely cites an example of a woman warned by a judge that if she escalates her case with John Hemming or another local member of parliament, she would be imprisoned. So yeah, there's actually an author who came out recently talking about this, exposing a lot from the birth mom point of view. I can see if I can get access to her book. Well, not just buy her book, but like maybe we can do an author interview. She is, again, a birth mom from the UK. I don't know if she'd be open to that, but I would love to hear from her, because here's the thing. This is not just a United States issue. Now, yes, most of what we're talking about is from the United States, but we are not alone in this. Adoptions happen in most countries, whether it's within the country or foreign. Um, but at the end of the day, the adoptee, which is what we're aiming for, right? That's what we're talking about, are facing challenges. And so I think it's important that if I'm going to be a channel or, a resource for fellow adoptees, that they can understand that this isn't just, from our country. This is from so many, and maybe if we band together to make huge differences, this would be good. Now, sorry, I'm doing this in the middle of this book, but if you are interested in telling your story on this channel, or want to be interviewed, whether you're an adoptee, or a birth parent, and maybe I'm considering opening it up to birth parents, let me know down below. I'll make a Google form so that you guys can access me easily, and put in your inquiries. That could also be inquiries for a book or a movie that I cover related to adoption, just anything. I do have a list, but I'm open to suggestions because, of course, we have so much to cover and it's important. Anyway, continuing on. In time of war, ironically, we're in the middle of watching the Ukraine and Russian destruction right now, which is a huge problem, but let's move on. Many children become separated from living parents, then placed in orphanages or offered to or taken by Americans and other foreigners as available orphans for intercountry adoption. This, we adoptees saw this coming from this Russian-Ukrainian war. There are already people who think that because this is going on, that this is acceptable. It is not. Just because someone's in a war doesn't mean you're entitled to their child. It does not. Those children want to return home, and they want their parents or some guardian, their kin. That is important to note. Just because there's a war doesn't mean that they need to be adopted. Let's make that clear. Okay, sorry. This mama bear, this adoptee is coming out strong in this chapter. Anyway, this occurred after the Korean War during the orphan baby lift in Vietnam, as well as during natural disasters such as the earthquake in Haiti. The taking of South Korean children for American adoption started in 1955 after the Korean War, which lasted from 1950 to 1953. When the war was over, many children were left orphaned. In addition, a large number of mixed-race GI babies, aka the offspring of the U.S. and other Western soldiers and Korean women, were filling up the country's orphanages. And that's according to Jang in 1998. Western religious groups, as well as other associations, started the process of placing children in homes in the United States and Europe. When Harry Holt, a born-again Christian from Eugene, Oregon, went to Korea and adopted 8 war orphans, and this is quoted in Rothschild, the Progressive, the Rothschild, which came out in 1988. His work has been followed by the Holt's International Children's Services. The first Korean babies sent to Europe went to Sweden via the social welfare system in the mid-1960s. By the end of the decade, Holt's International Children's Services began sending Korean orphans to Norway, Denmark, Belgium, Netherlands, France, Switzerland, and Germany. And that's according to the Korea Times, written by Hong in 1999. For the next decade, most of the children adopted from Korea were GI babies, fathered by American soldiers who served in the Korean War. Ameri-Asians, now account for fewer than 1% of adoptees. Foreign adoptions serve many purposes of the government. But, wait, what? But were all Korean adoptees actually orphans? That's a good question. I know several who weren't orphans, and now this is later. This is back like 1980s, 1990s-ish area, where their biological parents are both alive. So, yeah, they're not orphans. Like, let's be clear, there's not that many true orphans out there. There's usually at least one living parent, but they call them socioeconomic orphans, meaning they were given up because of the economic status. So, it's sad. Anyway, Lebensborn, who was called the Spring of Life in Antiquated German, was a Nazi program set up in Germany in 1935 by leader Heinrich Himmler. I know that name. Providing maternity homes and financial assistance to wives of SS members and to unmarried mothers, and also ran orphanages and relocation programs for children. Lebensborn expanded into several occupied European countries during World War II. The Lebensborn program was restricted to individuals who were deemed to be biologically fit and racially pure Aryans, and to SS members in occupied countries. Thousands of women facing social ostracism because they were in relationships with German soldiers and have become pregnant had few alternatives other than applying for the help with Lebensborn. After World War II, it was reported that Lebensborn was really a selective breeding program. While individuals were not forced to have sex with selected partners, the program did aim to promote the growth of superior Aryan populations. During the war, Lebensborn also forced surrender of alleged orphans from occupied northern and eastern Europe for adoptions by German families. At the Nuremberg trials, no evidence was found of direct involvement by the Lebensborn organization in the kidnapping of thousands of Polish children, who were subjected to Germanization by sending them to re-education camps and fostering them out to German families, a project also directed by Himmler. While America has theoretically gone past the stigma of illegitimacy, unwed motherhood, mixed-race families, and even gay parenting, Korean traditional society still places weight on paternal family ties, bloodlines, and the purity of race. Children of mixed race or those without fathers are not easily accepted in Korean culture. Many families would go through extensive and expensive procedures such as surrogacy or in vitro fertilization to ensure that their offspring, or at least related then, to accept a child of a complete stranger into their family. Indeed, it was the case until recently that Korean citizenship was tied to the family bloodline. Children who were not part of the Korean family, i.e., the real orphans, were not legal citizens of Korea. Another reason is the stigma of adoption. In 1986, South Korea had 18,700 orphaned or abandoned children. Almost half were sent abroad for adoption, 70% of those to the United States and the rest to Canada, Australia, and 8 European nations. While their motives cannot be easily determined, their methods are efficient and well established. 95% of families who do adopt choose babies less than a month old so that they can pass off their natural born offspring, overlooking older adoptable children. And that's according to the Korean Times, written by Yeon in 1997. Still present today, the demand for babies by infertile upper and middle class couples in the West is rising. That is true. In 2019, the procedure of international adoption is still growing and often favored method for couples to build their families and new countries and constantly opening up for international adoption, both as sending and receiving countries. Korean adoptees bring in hard currency, which is roughly 15 to 20 million a year. They believe the government of the cost of caring for children, which would otherwise be drained on the budget, would be around that much. At the time, significant compared to spending on social welfare. Critics claim Korean adoption agencies established a system to guarantee a steady supply of healthy children. Korean and other international adoptees, even more than domestic, are highly overrepresented when it comes to suicide attempts, mental illness, substance abuse, social maladjustment, crime, and other social and personal issues. And that is written by Hjern, Hjern, et al. In 2002. Korean adoption agencies support pregnant women's homes. 3 of the 4 agencies run their own. One of the agencies has its own maternity hospital and does its own delivery. All 4 provide the subsidized childcare. All pay foster mothers about $80 a month to care for the infants, and the agencies provide all food, clothing, and other supplies free of charge. They also support orphanages or operate them themselves. Along with the advice from counselors at the agencies, the system not only makes the process of giving up a child easier, it encourages it. When the time for the mother-baby separation arrives, the babies are flown to their foreign families. Payments are routinely paid to maternity hospitals, midwives, obstetricians, and officials at each of the 4 agencies. The agencies will cover the cost of delivery and the medical care for any woman who gives up her baby for adoption. The agencies also use their influence with hospitals and with the police to acquire abandoned children. And this is still quoted in The Progressive by Rothschild in 1988. The adoption of Korean children abroad has been criticized both in and out of Korea. A number of adoptees grew up feeling out of place or alienated from the Western society they are placed in. I have heard this by Korean adoptees, including my own cousin who was adopted from Korea. He was, I think, 3 or 4 at the time. I'm not going to tell his whole story, but he told me that, even though he is Korean, he is Asian descent, but growing up in the United States, especially a small town down Midwest southern state, Kentucky, and I say that as in it's a mix of both, he is surrounded by people that don't look like him, right? And then he moved for a while it was New York, and then it was LA, right? It was a mix. Anyway, he still says that, like, he doesn't feel accepted as much because he's too Asian in America, but then when he goes to Korea, because he does go back there, that he's too American. So he doesn't feel like he really fits in anywhere, and that's a problem. This is this is not just a societal problem. There's huge problems in the way that we view people and our heritage and things like that. And again, this is not just about these Asian cultures. This is something that happens with a lot of different heritages, right? Like within my own, I feel like you guys know already, but I'm Apache. I'm Native. And while most Natives are very accepting and understanding and, they are encouraging, there are a select few who are like, well, you didn't grow up with it, so you can't claim it. And that hurts, because especially when you want to reconnect with your own culture, that hurts you. Anyway, sorry, I went off on a rant. Anyway, let's continue. Despite the fact that many are well adjusted and go on to live happy and successful lives, in Sweden there has been a declining trend in adoption in recent years, but this is only due to the drop in the Korean birth rate, which is now at its lowest of any developed country. Church groups and other adoption facilitators have therefore resorted to outright kidnapping of children who are not confirmed orphans, as during the chaos of the Haiti earthquake, when children separated from surviving parents were easy prey. They do this. They very much do this. It's sad. Operation Baby Lift was the mass evacuation of children from South Vietnam to the United States and other countries, including Australia, France, and Canada, at the end of the Vietnam War. So this ranged from That's confusing. This was in 1975. Let's put that let's put it that way. In April 1975, while Americans signed a ceasefire accord with Vietnam, North Vietnamese troops spread through the South. The war's end caused hundreds of thousands of citizens to flee the country, fearing for their lives, including Hmong people who fought on the side of the Americans, while the central Vietnamese city of Da Nang, if I pronounce these things, I apologize, having fallen in March, with the Saigon under attack and having been shelled. On April 3rd, 1975, President Gerald R. Ford announced that the U.S. government would begin evacuating orphans from Saigon on a series of 30 planned flights aboard a C-5A Galaxy cargo aircraft. By the final American flight of the South Vietnam, over 3,300 infants and children had been evacuated. Although the actual number has been variously reported, along with the Operation New Life, 110,000 refugees were evacuated from South Vietnam at the end of the Vietnam War. Thousands of the airlifted children were adopted by families around the world. Service organizations including HALT, Friends of Children in Vietnam, aka FCVN, and then Friends for All Children, FFAC, Catholic Relief Services, International Social Services, International Orphans, and the Pearl S. Buck Foundation petitioned the government to help evacuate the various war orphans in their facilities in Vietnam. The operation was controversial because not all children on the flights were bona fide orphans, although many were earmarked for adoption. Documentation was often sketchy or inaccurate. In a few cases, natural parents or other relatives who later immigrated to the United States from Vietnam requested custody of children already placed. The hasty evacuation in the final days of the war also led to debate over whether the rescue operation were in the best interest of the child. Clearly not. But we'll continue on. For at least the past 5 decades, even illegally procured or kidnapped children have been quote-unquote legally adopted with the blessings of the United States Department of State. In a memo dated December 1992, responding to United Nations investigations into kidnapping and the UN's Sale of Children report, the U.S. Department legal advisor Peter Pfund opined that children kidnapped from other countries could be legally adopted in the United States under state confidentiality laws, if it was judged to be the child's best interest. And this is the specific wording that Pfund memo used as follows. December 1992. I can't even say this word. Convention of Intercountry Adoption, U.S. Federal implementing legislation issues by Peter Pfund, Assistant Legal Advisor for Private International Law, U.S. Department of State. So reads, DeHart has suggested that there may be only 2 legitimate grounds for non-recognition by Congress ratifying the Intercountry Adoption Convention and Treaty. So follows: 1, that the child was abducted from their biological parents, and 2, the consent of the biological parents was false or obtained by fraud. Neither would nullify an adoption made either abroad or in the United States as receiving state as contrary to public policy under the present wording of the convention. Article 22, unless recognition would also be contrary to the child's best interest. Preservation of information concerning the child's origin, Article 25, as presently worded, requires states parties to the convention to preserve information concerning the child's origin. Until the laws of both countries involved in international adoption to have access to that information. Such access may only become possible years or decades after an adoption takes place. Many U.S. states have different provisions concerning preservation of such information. Such information is likely to be gathered mainly by countries of origin from which a child is adopted. In order for the United States to be able to comply with its obligations to other countries parties to the Convention under Article 25, to preserve such information, the federal legislation may need to impose a uniform preservation obligation throughout the United States. Federal legislation would presumably not impose any requirements or for access which would be left for the individual states of the United States to be met. Yeah, to me that's a whole lot of BS. I mean, seriously, like, they just don't want to take responsibility. They never truly did. Anyway, hold on a second. Okay. In 1999, Elaine Gonzalez, Cuban, I don't think I said his name right. Apologies. Cuban father found himself in the middle of a custody battle between Cuba and Florida. It brought home the problems inherent in inter-country custody and adoption disputes. As the world watched former Attorney General Janet Reno's every move in the drama. According to the United Nations Rights of the Child Project Sale of Children report, the United Nations is the largest market for stolen children in the world, with California being the largest market for stolen children in the United States. The U.S. is one of the few countries in which American and foreign children can be institutionalized and adopted under state secrecy laws, making it difficult to follow the money trail. China, South America, and the third world countries have been popular with baby brokers. Since Romania and Russia halted international adoptions for Caucasian-looking children, a legal adoption of a foreign child costs, on average, this has risen by the way, $20,000, while an average private domestic adoption of an American child costs $60,000, and this is according to Amy Thurston, National Adoption Information Clearinghouse, NAIC. I'm just going to let you guys know that I have seen it range from $35,000 to about $80,000, and I have seen one where it goes as high as $120,000. But again, that is a range. These agencies actually have a freaking menu. I will cover that one day, but yes, that is true. They have menus on their own website of how much adoption costs based off race, country, religion, gender, all of that. It's gross. It is so gross. Anyway, most Iraqi war orphans would now be up for grabs were it not for the country's anti-adoption and anti-foreign guardianships policy. Couples who adopt usually have combined salaries of $50,000 to $60,000. This is according to the attorney Herbert Friedman, a Boston adoption attorney, and Norman Goldberg, National Adoption Foundation in Conservative Spotlight. Norman Goldberg, Human Events, written by Joseph A. D'Agostino. Adoptive Families magazine, issued July-August of 1995, on page 6, reported that Norman Goldberg, an adopter, founded the National Adoption Foundation, NAF, in 1995, which made an agreement with the nation's banks. Danbury, Connecticut, since merged with the Bank of America and offers grants and unsecured loans to families looking for a way to pay for adoption. Additionally, over 1,000 companies nationwide have been providing workers with adoption aid, ranging from paid leave to large cash payments. Wendy's hamburger restaurants have been paying their employees $4,000 per adoption, or $6,000 for adoption of a child with special needs, plus 6 weeks paid leave. In 1990, President Bush appointed Wendy's Dave Thomas to head the White House Initiative on Adoption, and in 1992, Thomas established the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption, with the goal of increasing adoptions of more than 150,000 children in foster care by making adoption easier and more affordable. Perhaps the words of the man who has been America's most adamant supporter of the adoption industry, sums it up best. This is a capitalist system where the laws of the market work their magic. This is by Bill Pierce, a former president and still active in projects of the Washington-based National Council for Adoption. People seem to believe that $16,000 or $17,000 is too much for a new car. If we're going to have quality service, you're going to have to pay for it. And that is written in the Boston Globe in 1998 in the article called "Corporate America Helping Foot the Bills." 10 years prior to that statement, this author had written Pierce informing him of her 18-year battle in attempting to provide her son's adopters with permanent medical information in Connecticut, of other similar problems due to sealed records. On November 5, 1986, he replied that NCFA did not have time nor resources to look into the matter in Connecticut, but also wrote NCFA favors mutual consent registries. And regarding open adoption, we have not done any studies, but there have been work done by some, including 4 papers by one of the agency directors, Arlene Kraft. And citing, our estimate is that approximately 5 million adoptees live in the United States. So that actually wasn't true at the time, but okay, we're going to continue on. We are interested in the important area of medical denial cases, but as I said, we are overwhelmed with work. At some point, we may be able to give the area the study it deserves and speak appropriately. Just what kind of work is more important than life and death issues of the adoptees NCFA has been creating? NCFA was not interested in adoptees' outcomes then, and is not interested now. That's very true. They still are not. Over a decade after Pierce's 1986 letter, the writings of NCFA's Thomas Atwood erroneously advised that adoptees don't need access to family medical information, which is so wrong because we really do. Adoptees have died from not having access to the proper information. Anywho, to date, NCFA still cannot find the time to address life and death issues of adoptees while collecting federal money to increase adoptions. Anyway, Lori Carangelo then goes on for several pages, starting in 1951 to 2011, a brief chronology of 160 years of government-protected child sealing. I told you guys I'm going to be skipping this part, so you guys can get the book and read it for yourselves. I highly recommend, and I hope you guys have a great day.